It is a delight to be here. And as I mentioned earlier in the opening, that this is a special place for me. I remember as a student, as a teacher, being here. As a student, this building did not even exist. And as a teacher, I was here many times during the prayer period for Silent Unity. And anyway, many memories. I was one of Mary's instructors, one of Erin's instructors. So lots of memories come back. Bob Conrad's instructor. What year was it? Same year, 2003? Yeah. Yeah, okay. That was a good class, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and I want to start out by saying, asking you a question. When someone says to you, when you say something and they respond to you and say, you know, that's a good question, what does that typically mean? How do you interpret that? Typically it means they don't have the answer, right? Yeah. So good question really doesn't have an answer. Or at least not an answer that can be put into words. We are conditioned from a very early age that we're supposed to have the right answers. Is that right? That's the right answer, yes. We're taught from the day we go into kindergarten, from the day we go into the first grade of school, elementary school, that whenever somebody asks you a question, you should have the right answer. We're rewarded for having the right answer. If we get the right answer, we get a good grade. If we get the wrong answer, or the answer that's not what the teacher wants, then we don't get a good grade, you see. So we are conditioned to second guess what the right answer is and then try to give that. Very deep conditioning. What is the right answer? But when you think about it, answers are closed. Once you have the answer, what happens? Close the book. Case is shut, right? No more. The mind is shut too. This is the answer. I'm no longer open. No more seeking, no more curiosity. And many people live their whole life that way. Many people live their whole life that way, knowing they have the answers. Therefore, they don't have to seek the questions. I had all the answers when I was 7 years old, because I went to Catholic school, and they told me the answers. They told me who I was and what God was and why I was here and the meaning of life, all of it. In a little book called the Baltimore Catechism, every question you had there, the answer was. So once you have that, you don't have to answer any more questions, right? You don't have to question any more answers, I should say. You close your mind, you close the book, and this is the way it goes. And tragically, many people live their whole life that way. Many people make up their minds and never change their minds. Make up their hearts and never change their hearts. We're conditioned to have the right answers, but we're not conditioned to ask questions. Questions are open. Questions are alive. Questions invite curiosity. The poet Mark Nepo would often say, never ruin a good question with an answer. You say, because a good question can only be answered by you living it. You say, who am I? I could give you an answer, or you could give an answer to that question. You say, this is who I am, boom. That's the end of it. Or you could live your life asking that question, who am I? And it unfolds like a lotus blossom. Every day there's a new awareness, you see. When we live with a question, we live in openness. When we live with the answers, we're closed down. We're not alive. The poet Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, a beautiful German poet, he writes this: be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart. Try to love the questions themselves. Do not seek answers which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. Live the questions now, and perhaps someday, without noticing it, you will be living the answer. You see. So a real good question, a true, profound question, cannot be answered. It can only be lived. As children, we're taught not to ask silly questions, right? That's a silly question. And so many times, even as an adult, many of us, including myself for many years, I was afraid to ask a question because I thought it was stupid. Or actually, I thought everybody else would think it was stupid, you see. So that's a silly question, and immediately we shut down. So most of the time before we even ask a question, there's an editor in there, there's a critic in there saying, well, that's a dumb question. If you ask that question, people will think you're stupid, you see. But some of the very best questions ever asked are silly questions. A real silly question like, why does time run only forward? Isn't that pretty dumb? Pretty silly? Of course time always runs forward. You know who asked that question? A man named Stephen Hawking. And from that question, he developed a whole field of research that is summarized in his book, A Brief History of Time. And that question opened up so many doors for scientists that followed him. What's it like to write on a beam of light? That's a fanciful, childlike question, but no adult would seriously ask that, would they? Who asked that question? Einstein, exactly, yeah. And of course, it was from that question came his theories of relativity, and, our lives would not be what they are now. I mean, even our GPS is based upon the theories of relativity. You see, it's used every day. So, silly questions sometimes open the door to the most profound answers. But those answers don't come in one-liners. They don't come in bumper sticker phrases, you see. Those answers are not answers. They're just bromides, if you will. They're just, like I say, they're like slogans. Slogans are not answers. Answers can only be understood and lived with our experience in life. We can only experience the answer. We cannot necessarily know it. Einstein himself said, never stop questioning. Never lose a holy curiosity. This is Albert Einstein, you say, who many people say was an atheist. He was not anything like an atheist. He didn't go to church, but he was, in a way, a mystic. You say, never lose a holy curiosity, he would say. Yeah. And his question that drove his life was, how does God think? When asked what the purpose of his life was, he said, to discover how God thinks. Not too far from unity, is it? Discovering how God thinks. See? But again, that's a question. That's something that's open. It cannot be given to you in words, but it can be given to you in experiences. So just in order for us all to have a little experience of this, I'd like to give you a koan. Koan is sort of a puzzle. Koan is actually a Japanese word that the Zen teachers sometimes give to students to meditate upon. Silly questions like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? What did your face look like before you were born? Okay. Silly questions that lead to, not to answers in words, but to profound openings, you see. So the teacher then would interview the student, and he would not look for the answer, but he would ascertain whether or not the student really was alive with the question. And that's what really counts. Am I living that question? Is that light come on within me that leads to freedom? There are questions that keep us stuck. There are questions that lead to freedom. So let's do a little practice here. Let's do a little experiment. I'm going to give you a koan to play with for a few minutes. We got enough time, I believe. So imagine, if you would, imagine, please, that you are inside of a room with solid steel walls, floor, ceiling, no doors, no windows, no entries, no exits, just this cell. So you're inside this room. What's the question that's likely to show up in your mind? How did I get out? How did I get out? But you see, I can think about how to get out for a long time. How do I get out of here? Well, I can't get out of here. I can't get out of here. So I fall into despair, depression. I can't get out of here. What's the question that leads to freedom? How did I get in? Yeah. How did you get in? How did you get in? You imagined yourself there, right? You got in by imagining that you were in. You get out by stop imagining that you're trapped. There's no real prison. I just said imagine you're in the prison. How do you get out? You stop imagining. How do I get out of my problems? What if I stop making problems problems? And I just live the question of how did I get in here? You know, how do I get out of this pain and suffering? How did I get into it? You say. Then live that question. How did I get here? Why am I here? What am I here for? Powerful questions. But nobody could give you the answer. Don't let anybody give you the answer. You know, if somebody says, well, it's God's will. Oh, okay. Case closed, God's will. Or if somebody else says, well, it's heredity. Okay, heredity, case closed. Or it's your own fault, or whatever answers are given, that answer itself becomes a prison. You see? It's only by living in that question that we can become free. How did I get here? How am I? Why am I here? What am I to do? What's the purpose of my life? Great questions, awesome questions. But the problem is the mind asks the questions and the mind tries to get the answer and it can't. You see, the mind asks the questions and only the heart can give the answer. There's a very wise Indian teacher, East Indian teacher, named Nisargadatta, who says, the mind creates the abyss, love crosses it. The mind creates an abyss, and only love can cross that abyss, you see. Only the heart can cross the abyss created by the mind. Only the heart can answer the questions that the mind cannot answer. So living in that unanswered question is very powerful. So I want to ask you for a moment, what questions are driving your life? What questions, conscious or unconscious, are driving your life, you see? So oftentimes, we let our life experiences dictate what those questions are. You know, how can I be safe? That's a question we often ask. And maybe we live with that our whole life, looking for safety. You see, how can I not be hurt? How can I not be ridiculed? Rather than, how can I express the fullness of who I am? You see. So, it's very, very, very important that we explore what it is that we're truly asking. What questions, what am I about, you say? Oftentimes there are unconscious questions that drive us, questions that are driven by our childhood, questions that are driven by traumas from the past. And so, looking at those questions and saying, how did I get here? And then asking, what questions will make me free? Very powerful practice. Because so much of the time, religion has been giving answers to the wrong questions. They've been giving answers to questions nobody's asking. You see? And so, the answers are important to those that are asking it, but they're irrelevant to the people that are listening to it. You know, that's why so much of the time we hear about religion being obsolete or churches dying today, because they're giving answers to questions that people aren't asking. So what is it that people are asking for? People are asking not for answers, but for experience. They don't want to know about God. They want to know God. That makes all the difference in the world. And that answer can only be lived. What is God? What is love? Who am I? What's my relationship with God? Beautiful answers, or beautiful questions. Don't try to give the answer with the mind. Let yourself live it. So I want to close with this, because when we live with this holy curiosity, when we live with this question, open question, we become a lifelong learner. We're always learning because we always have the question open in our mind and in our hearts. So the American philosopher Eric Hoffer writes, in times of radical change, it's the learners who will inherit the earth, while the learned will be beautifully equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. So keep questioning and don't be in a hurry for the answers. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your questions in your hearts.